So you want to make a horror setting for your role-playing game, or maybe you just want to make a short horror one-shot, or maybe you just kind of want to scare your players a little bit. So how would you go along doing this? I've seen a lot of articles and message boards where their answer is literally just somewhere along the lines of D&D is not a horror game, or Pathfinder doesn't work with horror settings. Those people are wrong. They're just wrong. I don't know what else to say about that. In this first video, I hope to help out some of you DMs or GMs out there who just really want to scare your players. So these discussions got a little bit too long for what I originally planned, so I think I'm going to have to split this into a 7-part series breaking down different types of horror, instead of my original idea, which was just to tackle all 7 in one go. The different segments I was going to tackle were dark fantasy, body horror, cosmic horror, ghost stories, gothic horror, psychological horror, and slasher horror. I realized after the first one that I had way more to talk about than I originally thought, so I think this is going to end up being 7 different videos, at least, just talking about each specific different type of horror once an episode. The first one I decided to tackle was the one that I knew I'd have the most trouble with trying to explain, which was dark fantasy. I decided to call up a friend of mine who had been a player in my campaign that I'd ran for over a year. And so we had a long discussion over what we thought dark fantasy was, what it entailed, what sort of monsters you can use, and everything like that. So here is our conversation regarding dark fantasy. It's a bit of a long listen, so I encourage you to put some earbuds in and just enjoy.
So we're going to talk about dark fantasy in our now multi-part series about horror in D&D and other role-playing games.
Yeah.
So, dark fantasy kind of is different from the other topics we're going to talk about because I believe with dark fantasy, it seems to be mostly a fantasy subgenre, less of a horror subgenre. It relies more on fantasy themes than it does on horror themes.
Right. So it's not so much of the scary elements, it's more of just a darker, nittier, grittier type storytelling.
Yeah. So like it's probably going to still have stuff like the classic fantasy tropes. It might have like castles and like princesses and
Knights and
knights,
all those
magic.
good things.
Yeah. But just kind of a grim, like a darker take on those ideas.
Right. It's not going to be like a Disney movie.
No.
It's going to be
like a Tim Burton movie.
Yeah, like a Tim Burton movie.
I think that's a good way to think of dark fantasy, is like a Tim Burton movie, basically. Like everything is skewed through a dark lens, but it's not an actual scary lens. It's just sort of a mute palette lens.
Right.
Basically, any woods that you go into are probably dangerous.
Dark and twisted. And
yeah,
the
full of
knots on the
full of
trees.
predators and evil, capricious creatures that are going to try to murder you at any chance they get.
No fun song time,
No.
Squirrel singing in the background.
Exactly. Basically, there's no enchanted woods that are safe. Every bit of woodland that you go into is probably dangerous, probably going to kill you.
Would this be like when we were in the woods?
Yeah, actually, I'm thinking...
Yeah. It just clicked in my mind.
I really wanted to, when I was making that whole campaign thing, I really wanted the woods to be dangerous.
A very scary place.
I wanted to, because I just remembered in like middle school reading about like Brothers Grimm stories and how basically all of them were designed to keep kids out of the woods. there were a lot of stories about kids going into the woods and just all the dangers they encountered in the woods. And I just liked the idea that the woods could be, back in fantasy times, the woods could be literally one of the most dangerous, scary places you could go into, because you have no idea what could lurk in those woods.
Right. Because Chandler, I mean, he scared us so much that we debated taking the long way around this map.
They could have made a 3-day trip into like a 2-month long trip just to avoid a large
We went in there,
forest.
things got insane, and everything wanted to kill us.
I feel like a really minor thing that you can do, that you can really highlight in the woods, is dark vision. I feel like dark vision gets a lot of credit because of how many races get dark vision. But this is where you can super nerf the idea of dark vision, because they can see about 60 feet out in like a dim black and white, like a grayscale pattern. The woods go way deeper than 60 feet.
Definitely.
Um,
And with all the trees
There
and
are- I was gonna
branches,
trees are in the way. Thick foliage means that even if you can see out 60 feet, you might be able to see out 20 feet before you hit a tree line that is just too thick to see through. And depending on what creatures are out there, they might be smart enough to just know, well, that looks like an elf. That looks like a tiefling. I'm just gonna stand at the edge of the darkness here and not let them see me, just because I want to torture them, but I'm not gonna tell them exactly where I am. They're gonna have to come out and find me, and they're not gonna do that.
like a Wendigo.
Like a Wendigo, exactly. You can go pretty old school with the monsters that you come up with, and you can give them all their old-fashioned-y sort of weaknesses and powers and stuff. So one idea with that is that almost everything is demonic in nature, and that's a whole idea in its entirety, but I think it could work, where basically you go like really old-fashioned and you say any sort of aversion to the natural order is demonic. Werewolves are demonic, vampires are demonic, the undead, anything like that. Fey creatures are obviously from the devil. Everything is devilish. Also, you probably don't separate devils and demons anymore. You just kind of lump them into bad
boys group.
bad boys group. Yep.
There we
The bad boys.
go. The bad boys.
But
They hate each other.
yeah,
They're both the bad boys.
they're all the bad boys. The thing you can also do with dark fantasy, along the lines of that, is make everything as it was in those old-fashioned fairy tales. And by that I mean hopelessly depressing. Everything has a bad outcome. Nothing works the way you want it to. Everyone's gonna die.
Yeah.
The
mean-
world is gonna kill you. Everything will kill you.
You can even take it to the color scheme that everyone sees. You know, it's dark. It's
Everything's
a lot of grays
everything's
and blacks.
dingy.
Yeah, it's dirty instead of bright colors. I mean, everything's just depressing.
Anybody with magic, obviously
Witches.
witches,
Warlocks,
they
you
work
know.
with the devil.
Yeah.
This is where you could really flex some low magic setting. You can basically make magic a rarity because people are scared to even use it because it comes from an unholy place. Therefore, you can really thrive off of that. Any sort of town you go into, they're constantly under siege from something. They're basically nothing more than just kind of like holding back the larger threat. They are not permanent safe havens. They barely can do anything about it as is.
The peasants are husks of their former selves. I mean, they're all
Just know
Worn out.
that eventually it's just something's gonna kill them. They might rally together if they can determine where the source is coming from, but other things they really can't do anything about. They're all probably paranoid with each other and they don't know what's going on there. But that doesn't mean like it has to stay depressing the entire time. I mean, this is where the player characters could come in. They can actually bring light to this hopeless place. Make it like not as completely garbage to live in all the time forever.
Yeah.
They can add a little bit of light.
Set up a church if you have a cleric. They can work together and you can set up a church and turn this little town around or wherever.
So I feel like for some creatures, just out of storytelling going into like threats, some creatures would probably be like everything in the Monster
hag.
Manual.
I
Yeah,
mean,
if we wanna
hags
go-
in general.
If we want to
like-
go old-fashioned, we can go like witches, vampires, werewolves. Hags work perfectly. I'm really thinking any kind of hag. We're not going to limit it to green hag. We're going to go green hag, sea hag.
Can have a hag eating children,
Yeah.
you know, in a town, stealing kids.
Old-fashioned hag eating babies that get too close to the woods. Sorry, those kids got too close to the woods. The hag lured them out and eats them.
Should have scared your children more. Sorry.
Exactly. I think any sort of aberrations, undead, anything could be like basically reimagined in like a really grim, dark setting. You can have devils, basically devil worshippers, out in the woods, out in the wherever,
Little cult.
in the plains. Yeah, the cults. It's really kind of based off of like twists. You could put like you say, we're gonna take this, we're gonna put a twist on it. We're gonna make it creepier. We're gonna make it spookier. I think one that really works well, especially with the way that we've been describing fantasy, kind of low tier. These are probably ones that you can do at level like 1 through 3, maybe to like 5 max. Is a creature like a scarecrow. A scarecrow is a pretty low CR creature, so it's kind of odd to think about how you can use a scarecrow. But I think a scarecrow works perfectly.
Oh my
Especially if you want to pair them up with some witches, get that really like old, that little Halloween-y feel going on.
Your party walks through a cornfield.
Oh
and,
man.
I mean, it's taller than they are, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And they split up, and they each have their own scarecrow that comes after them, and then a witch boss at the end.
Now we do have to separate this from gothic horror, which is easy to get the two confused, because gothic horror is more like mist-shrouded streets and dark, foggy forests and vampires looming over a nighttime cityscape and werewolves stalking the woods, while dark fantasy is more like evil fairies snatching away your children and replacing them with changelings, and madness and delusion overtaking a small town based off of a dark curse that was placed there years ago and stuff like that. So it's kind of easy to get it confused in that regard. I also kind of feel like a lot of stuff has dark fantasy in it. Basically, any time a normal D&D game wants to get a little bit spooky, just a little bit. I mean, you don't have to delve full on in, but at any time that you bring up creatures like hags living in a swamp, or anytime you bring up werewolves stalking across the forest, stealing children away from their homes at night, I feel like that's just built into dark fantasy, and you're already doing it. I feel like a lot of people probably do dark fantasy without realizing that they're doing it, which is cool, that people are already halfway there in that regard. And I feel like this is one of the easier brands of horror to
Incorporate
pull off. Yeah.
into your game.
Exactly.
No, I think it's a, like you said, a very easy thing to bring into the game, and most people are already doing it, so it can definitely lead into these other types.
I do feel like it's a good gateway.
Yeah, it's a good gateway into like going deeper into horror.
You're right, because literally the first thing that you guys fought were hags.
Yep.
After the initial reaching level 2, which was killing animals in the woods, reaching level 2, I set you guys up to kill some hags. And that was actually Oh my god, we almost didn't talk about that.
That was
That's-
insane.
That's some dark fantasy. You encountered a town, a small village
It's perfect. It's
on the edge
picture.
of some woods, and the town was fraught with this problem. Their children kept going missing in the night. They would just go out into the woods, and the adults didn't know why. The kids would go out into the woods and they'd just disappear,
Never come back.
never come back. They searched the woods and they found no evidence of where they went. It's like their footprints would lead to an area and then they just vanish. And so you guys,
We decided to take up the quest, be like, yeah, we'll take care of it. We'll get your kids back.
Exactly.
We'll try to.
you trekked out into the woods and you came across a cottage
That was only there during the night.
that only appeared in the late hours of the night. And you determined that it appeared at a certain time of the night and then it would disappear the next morning. So you trekked inside and you found in the back of the empty house, in the back, there was a small wardrobe, I believe. Was it a wardrobe?
That was a cupboard.
I think it was a cupboard. There was a cupboard that had a strange mist behind it. And you followed the mist, and it led you into like another plane almost.
Yep.
A small, like, centralized plane. And inside there was.
A lake with a cottage next to it with the lights on.
Mm-hmm.
So we went up, knocked on the door, we went into the cottage, and all the kids were in there eating sweets. And there was this nice lady who was baking them these sweets. So nice.
Yeah, we gotta say it with the context of what we know now.
Oh my gosh. She was.
This was the first moment
Everyone.
where everybody realized they couldn't trust anyone ever
The
again.
funny thing was is that we never learned our lesson.
She was a nice lady.
Yeah,
I
she
mean,
was-
why would you not trust
Yeah,
her?
she was super nice. She was making these kids sweets. Some of us sat down and had some sweets too.
Yeah.
And she told us that her sister lures these kids here. She lives in the lake.
She's
And
evil. She's a hag.
She's evil. Yeah, she's evil. She's a hag. And the nice lady who's making the sweets says that she keeps them safe in this house. So we go, we kill the hag in the lake. We come back, the lights are off.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Yeah, and we're like, what's going on?
What happened to our nice lady friend? Where'd
Yeah,
she
our
go?
nice lady friend.
Oh no, maybe another hag came and kidnapped her.
Yeah, we gotta check this out. Maybe she had another sister. We open the door, and the place is trashed. Sweets on the ground. Sadly, they were delicious.
Claw marks along the floors and the walls,
Yeah.
like long, jagged claws.
We go into the back, in the kitchen, and we look up, and all the kids are cocooned and stuck to the ceiling. Walks in the nice lady. Or the nice lady walks in.
Now walks in
Yeah, she
the
just
nice
walks-
lady.
Yeah, walks in the nice lady.
Uh-huh.
And she's like, oh, well, you took care of my sister. Thank you for that. I'm getting sick of having to
Share my meals
my
with her.
meals with her. And we're like, oh, what?
What do you mean by that, nice lady? Like,
I swear we're not dumb.
look, you guys had just started playing.
Yeah.
Nobody knew that this was in the realm of possibility at the time.
Like, what are you talking about? She turns into a gray hag in front of us and proceeds to wipe the floor with our little party.
Absolutely tore you guys like asunder.
Yeah.
Just completely ravaged everyone.
One of her abilities, she could whip you with her tongue. It would paralyze you and blind you. So half our party were on the ground, paralyzed and blinded, not being able to do anything. Like,
That
we
was.
got out of there by the skin of our
They
teeth.
barely made it out of that alive, but I feel like that specifically targets the classic dark fantasy tropes fairly well. I think that's a perfect example, and we almost didn't talk about it. I think that's everything I have to say about dark fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, that really sums it up perfectly right there.
just stuff like that is basically all you need. I mean, you're probably already halfway there if you're not already there, so just keep doing what you're doing. Use them spooky monsters. Don't be afraid.